All right, I'm going to repeat myself real quick. Hi, my name is Caroline Rogers. I'm the coordinator for disability outreach at the Career Center. Thank you all for joining us for our first Universal Design panel. I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Suzanne Boyd.
Thank you, Caroline. I'm so excited to have you all for this topic today regarding universal design principles, building an inclusive foundation. And we have three amazing experts with us, Dr. Rosemary Rossetti, Sasha Thompson, and Dr. Victoria, I'm going to try Verleza. I hope I said that correct. But thank you all three for being here with us. And I would love for you to introduce yourself a little bit more, talk a little bit about the work that you do, the type of advocacy that you provide in the community, and then we will dive into some questions and also save some time at the end for some Q&A from the audience. Dr. Rossetti, why don't we start with you, and then we'll go to Sasha after that.
Well, thank you. I'm speaking to you from my national demonstration home and garden here in Columbus, Ohio. It's the Universal Design Living Laboratory, the top-rated home in North America, showcasing universal design. If you're curious about my home, you can take a virtual tour and get a free copy of my book, The Universal Design Toolkit, at udll.com. I'm a specialist in universal design and accessible design, not just with homes, but also workplaces, cities, restaurants, zoos, botanical gardens, you name it, a built environment. And I would love to continue to make them more accessible. I'm working with cities as well as associations and corporations. In terms of my other work with meeting professionals, I help accommodate people with disabilities at meetings and events.
Thank you so much. Sasha.
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Sasha Thompson. I am the founder of The Equity Equation, which is a consulting firm in the Washington, D.C. area. I focus really on creating inclusive workplaces that center psychological safety. But I have been an advocate and been doing kind of diversity, equity, and inclusion work throughout my career. And so, having started my career in higher education, always have stayed connected. And probably about 2 years ago, was talking to a professor in Nebraska, and he said, "You know what? I have a doctoral student that's looking at universal design." As a way to replace diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so that just kind of piqued my interest and really started looking at how the principles of universal design really do create the foundation for inclusive workplaces. And so the work that I've been doing recently has been really looking at or challenging organizations to think about universal design as kind of the next iteration of their diversity, equity, and inclusion work, along with partnering that with the psychological safety work. So really wanting to make sure that people feel valued, seen, heard, and connected to where they are in the workplace, but then also expanding that beyond the workplace as well. So looking forward to this conversation.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Dr. Verleza.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, maybe good morning for some. Dr. Victoria Verleza, I use pronouns she and her. I'm calling in from Connecticut, but I am not solely a Connecticut, well, we call us nutmakers. I used to live in California for about 10 years, and that's where I got my teaching, my foot in the door in teaching. I, similarly to Sasha, have a background in higher education. I was a student affairs professional for about 10 years. One of my master's degrees is in student development theory and higher education administration. I currently am an adjunct faculty member at a Hispanic serving institution, a community college here in Connecticut. I am a employee experience manager, kind of doing all the things at an engineering firm. And I'm also a consultant that focuses on anything related to social justice. I don't call it diversity, equity, and inclusion work. I do identity conscious work. I am talking about the way in which systems have minoritized folks systemically, historically, and are strategically doing that, and how we can break down barriers for folks in the workplace and in higher education. This is Oscar. He will be my beloved TA for the day. So I am kind of straddling a bunch of different areas. I will also share with you, I am autistic, dyslexic, dyspraxia, ADHD. Those things matter when we're talking about disability. I am a disabled person. I have multiple chronic illnesses, none of which really give me accommodations for the workplace. So I come at this from both an HR perspective, lived experience perspective, accommodations, and resourcing myself. So thank you for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Thank you so much. Excited to jump into these questions and hear about universal design from all of you. First question, tell us a little bit more about what universal design is and why should college students, recent grads, faculty, staff care about it when thinking about, the future of workplaces in general.
Well, I'll jump right in. As a specialist in universal design, it is a concept, a framework. It's inclusive design, it's human-centered design. It's not only about the environment, it's also about products and communication. It's been around since probably the mid-1980s, way before the Americans with Disabilities Act. And it has 7 basic principles of universal design that have stood the test of time since they were first crafted. So universal design, think of it as a framework. It is not specialized design, it is not accessible design, but it uses the principles of accessibility as its baseline. So we're looking at creating things that everyone can use as much as possible. Realizing there are some outliers that will say the feature didn't help me at all. But for the most part, it is universal. It is inclusive design. And why should the students be interested in it? Hopefully someday you'll be in the workplace or starting your own business. And to what extent you need to have universal design in terms of even getting in the building or parking, having a desk that's comfortable and lighting that's comfortable, and a sound environment that's comfortable, as well as a no fragrance environment. So there's a lot involved with universal design as I evaluate a building and help in the design of a new space to say, hey, here are some changes that could be made that will accommodate people with disabilities better, as well as all the employees. It's not just about accommodating people with disabilities.
I don't know if I can add to that definition. I think that was probably like the most universal definition. I think from a perspective of the workplace and students, I will work my way backwards. And that I think for organizations, we're looking at workplaces that are becoming more diverse in every broad sense of the imagination. And so for organizations to think about who is not already at the table, how do we prepare for them? Because that's going to be important in that recruiting process. That's going to be important in that retention process. That is important in that the employee experience, right? So thinking about all of these things holistically from an organization standpoint, I think is critical in everything that we're doing. Now, working backwards to students, again, this is probably the most diverse group of students that we've ever seen coming into the workforce, and they have high demands. This is the one organization, this is the one generation, at least these last 2 generations, that will come into an organization and say, you know what, I do not feel that I'm valued, seen, heard, or connected here. I'm out. And so organizations need to keep that in mind. These are not folks that are going to stay for loyalty. These are not folks that are going to, oh, I'm going to, try to see if it works. They have high expectations for organizations to have it in place. And so I think for students, it's important to be able to understand, you know what, I may not need this accommodation now, but it's important for me to be in a workplace that has accommodations for people. And thinking about it before we even get there. I think one of the mistakes that a lot of organizations make is they don't think about accommodations until they're forced to do so. And so a lot of the work that we do is working with organizations to say, okay, who's not at the table? and who could you be missing out on in the recruiting process because you haven't thought about who's not at the table, right? So really having people be proactive and intentional in what they expect out of a universal design. And so a lot of what we've seen, especially in the tech industry, I was in tech for 10 years, ping pong tables and all of these things to create these cultures may also have a counter effect. And so understanding, okay, who are we really trying to accommodate? And if we accommodate for those that may have some type of auditory challenge or maybe neurodiverse in other ways, we're making sure that everyone feels comfortable, that they feel valued as a part of that environment. And we're just not accommodating to the majority. And so that I think is what's important for students to keep in mind, but also for organizations.
I just want to add two pieces. Neither need to be added, but I was thinking about it as both Sasha and Dr. Rossetti were talking. Meeting people where they are without needing to know why they need the thing is what Gen Z and Alpha Gen are going to want. Gen Z, 53% are saying they are neurodivergent and or have some sort of sensory need. They're coming in diagnosed either formally or self-diagnosed. So having universal learning design already in place for organizations, for classrooms, faculty should really be reviewing their syllabi and seeing if they are meeting accommodations without having the formality of the diagnosis is going to be imperative. And especially for those of you looking at workplaces, I want to double click what Sasha said around knowing what you're worth and seeing what organizations are proactively offering without you having to say, hey, I need this thing. And that is my entire existence. So I wrote an article this morning, it's on LinkedIn, about proactively meeting people's needs without them having to disclose. What we're going to see is folks not necessarily wanting to share their diagnosis, especially now in this climate of everything is under attack, including ADA and including disability rights laws. People may have fear, and it is workplaces' responsibility to create psychological safety so folks can share, but that also means training managers and presidents and CEOs and the individual contributor on what does it mean to be anti-ableist? What does it mean to be inclusive and anti-oppressive and have a liberatory thinking in terms of universal learning design, and not just do what we've always done because we're faculty and we were trained in this way. We need to think outside the box because these generations expect it. And I love the word demand, Sasha, because it's so true. They will demand from us more than a lot of people think is deserving because we didn't have it. So why do they? Well, let's try to build a better world, in my opinion.
Thank you all so much. Such a thorough response. You've already touched on this a little bit, but can you share a little bit more about how universal design helps create workspaces that are not just accessible for people with disabilities, but also supportive of neurodivergent individuals or those with other diverse needs? Maybe providing some specific examples that you've worked with or seen.
I'll say I can just personally just speak about even my experience, right? I am not diagnosed with anything. I have two bonus boys that are on the autism spectrum. And so that has given me a very different perspective of needs. But it also has made me, as literally this morning, I sent a message to my mom, like, wait a minute, I wasn't gifted and talented. Did I really have ADHD? And she was like, I don't know what you're talking about, but it's how things are. When I look back in the work that I do, how I had to accommodate for myself in the workplace and creating, I needed quiet spaces. Like I could not be in the middle of all the hubbub. I needed to be kind of off to the side. And even though that was perceived by some as me being antisocial, it wasn't me being antisocial. It was, if you want me to get some work done, I need to be able to focus. Right. And so just my experience in that and the reaction that I would get from my managers and my peers did not make it an environment that was psychologically safe for me, nor one that supported what I needed. And so I actually was speaking to a friend of mine who did our ADA at the time. And she was saying, yeah, this office was not designed for people to not be social, right? Everything was around this hub, everything was around being social. And there was no place for people to escape. So again, and I was telling Dr. Rossetti earlier, like this is the same friend that told me about her and her work. And so really being conscious and intentional about how are we doing this so that people are set up for success. And I think that's probably the most important piece of this, or the question that people need to ask themselves as they're preparing the workplace. How are we setting people up for success?
Well, I know, Victoria, you've got more to say, so I'm just going to be brief here. As I look at an environment and I see that it's acoustically a quiet environment. So you have to look at how sound is transported, how high the ceilings are, what the acoustics are in the rooms also, and that impacts the quietness. And I'm starting to see a lot of different, more modern workplaces with smaller cubicles that are totally in glass, so people know you're in there working. They don't think you're hiding, that you really are working, and your supervisors can see you in there working, whether or not you have noise canceling headphones on, but you are in a comfortable environment with a desk that is capable of you standing or sitting and adjusting the flexibility of the height of that table, that workspace, as well as your chair. So those are some things that I'm looking at, is not only the individual working in a space by themselves, but also the acoustics of that space, so that the sound doesn't transfer from a conference room into another space, or from the kitchen and the pantry into another space, or from the street coming into the building. We need to look at making it quieter. Victoria, it's yours.
It was funny to watch you and Sasha. You both unmuted at the same time, and I was like, "Who's gonna get it?" So there's a lot of things workplaces can do. One of those things is thinking outside of our own identities and thinking about what we're not talking about. So to echo and tie into the sound, well, we talked a little bit about this earlier. It's also scent. It's also lighting. It's also where you're positioned in a busy walkway or near a window or not. My firm recently moved, so we actually created an entire new floor in downtown Hartford, and it is bright and it is brand new. But what we did proactively from the beginning was I consulted internally on sensory processing, on colors, on positions, on bathrooms, on gender neutral bathrooms, on do we have a chest feeding station or a wellness room? Do we have the ability for these to be sound, no sound, so like noise machines in them? What are the other things that we are socializing? So we know that for some ADHDers, and this may resonate with some of you, you may need to have television or a podcast on or something. How are we helping folks to recognize we should not be policing other people's working style in an open air office, which a lot of companies, for whatever reason, think that the bullpen is the best way. It is not. It is highly unproductive. When I go to the office, I do not even bring my laptop because I can't do anything. I do a lot of thought leadership. When I'm in the office, it's Victoria, 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 Victoria. No, I can't do anything. Not even gonna bring my computer. So I sit out in the open, and I know by the end of the day, my battery's gonna be done. I shared I'm autistic and ADHD. That is a lot of people time. So one of the things that workplaces are starting to do is overhauling their recruitment to offboarding processes to be more neuro-inclusive, including training staff, recreating or revamping their hiring processes, creating really, really good feedback cycles, because guess what? Surprise, students, no one knows how to give feedback in the world of work, especially non-biased feedback that is not related to any of our identities. So that's one of the things places are starting to do, is think about anti-bias training in the lens of feedback. So really thinking about all of the things. Where's the kitchens? Where are spaces where somebody might be observing Ramadan and they come to the office and yet they're positioned right near the kitchen? We should be thinking about that. So really trying to create spaces that someone doesn't need to say to you, I need this. So firms, organizations, corporations, I work with some tech companies, I work with a lot of higher education institutions around these things. How are we creating neuro-inclusive, neuro-affirming spaces in the classroom for students living there or for folks who are working in any organization? And I really appreciate, Carolyn, you putting the chat questions because was lost. So
Thank you guys so much. So next question, and I know Caroline will put this in the chat, but can you give some real life examples of companies or workplaces where maybe you have helped them successfully implement universal design? And what kind of changes did they particularly have to make?
Well, some of you go to Starbucks. That's one of my clients. It was a national panel that worked with them, a series of architects and interior designers, as well as universal design specialists. And it was a long process to redesign Starbucks for the people who work there, not necessarily for the customers. And they put out their new prototype over in Washington, D.C., located near the Gallaudet University. And if you look online on my website, as well as just search Starbucks new inclusive design location, you'll find the articles where the counter has been redesigned so it's easier for the baristas to reach over the counter. And it's also got knee space underneath it for the person in a wheelchair to pick up their beverages. The people there know American Sign Language because of the customers. Acoustically, the ceiling is lower and has special material to make that a very quiet space. There are low tables so that people are accommodated that need a low table with knee space underneath. The doors open with a push of a button. In fact, a service dog could open that door because the service button is reachable for the nose of the service dog that might be accompanying someone there. So, and they created a whole new coffee maker with sounds and vibrations, making it a lot more apparent when the brew is ready. So that's one of the clients that I work with is Starbucks. Another one is Merck Pharmaceutical. I am on the board of directors of the Global Universal Design Commission, and I am the lead for the certification committee. So we have Merck properties worldwide that we review by photos and videos all over the world. They show us what they've done in their workplace. And so I've got to be very proud of Merck. That is the global Merck. Anytime they're taking a lease space and putting in a new office or a new laboratory, they have our Global Universal Design Commission partnering with them on the design of that space. And then after it's finished, we do a review to see what it looks like, to see if we'll certify it as universal design. So there's a couple of examples.
Thank you so much.
I love the nonverbals. So I did a little research on this because, so like I said, I came from tech, and one of the examples that came up really spoke to me was around sprints, right? So if you've been in tech, what a sprint is you're getting a group of people to come together to come up with a design to solve a problem, right? And so Microsoft actually did a sprint around universal design for Xbox, and really spent a week trying to figure out how can we make this more accessible. What does this look like for our controllers? What does this look like for the games that we have? And what I appreciated about the process was they had people that were from the community that were impacted in the design process, right? And so one of the things that I mentioned earlier when I was working in corporate, I worked on our inclusive marketing team. And that was a big part of what we would do, right? It's like, let's not design something without having the people that are most impacted at the table. So that we're not just doing this and patting ourselves on the back and checking a box, but it really is being impactful. And so that was one that really spoke out to me. But the other thing that I have seen also, excuse me, when I worked at Amazon was, let's create something, let's do this sprint, but then let's document it so that we can share our learnings with others in this community internally, so that we're not always having to recreate the wheel. And I think that was probably one of the most impactful things that I have seen in making sure that we're creating spaces for everyone. And I'll take this out of the disability space for a bit and focus on the LGBTQ plus community. So one of the things that I've seen was, especially right around COVID, the start of COVID, there were some employees that were using that time to transition. And so part of what our employee resource group did was, we're going to create a toolkit, because we want to make sure that managers know what to do. We need to make sure that everyone knows, and they're not like, oh, okay, who do I need to talk to? And you're getting misinformation. And so I think that transition of, pardon the word transition, but the transition of who needs to know what, and documenting that process and iterating on that, I think is such a huge part of an important piece of how do you make things universal, right? Because we want to make sure that we're looking at this from all angles. And if there's a shift, if there's a change, we can do that. And we're not starting from the beginning, right? So you're going to constantly iterate on what is taking place. And so when I think about inclusive workplaces, that is one of those pieces that is tangential to universal design, but I think it speaks to, the tenets of this is for everyone, right? We're going to create something where everyone can have access and feel like they have support. And it may look different regardless of what the situation is.
I gave a couple of my examples. I do a lot of work in higher education lately, over the past several years. I'm being brought in to educate faculty specifically on how to utilize different strategies to embed universal learning design into their practice, where it's not always taught, right? So faculty are often taught to be experts in the field, not necessarily experts at teaching. And a lot of it is just learn on the job. And same thing with managers. You aren't hired because you're a stellar manager. You're hired because you're stellar at your job. And then it's like, oh, well, now let me retrofit my leadership skills. So a lot of what I do is awareness building and strategies, interventions. How do I do this on a daily? One of the low-hanging fruit that I really encourage folks to utilize in the workplace from a people leader perspective, to, I'm not going to say level the playing field, but start to build that psychological safety. I said I was in engineering, right? So I am in a STEM field. Stereotypically, people feelings not really like a big thing. I get called the heart of my company, which is so weird because I am not the heart of anything. I'm just kidding. I am. But like, people come to me to be the heart. And so what I did was, immediately I gave everybody a working with me document. You fill this out, you share it with your supervisor shares theirs with you and the team. And this is how you figure out, what are the unwritten norms? What are the unspoken rules? What are the things I need to know about you to create kind of an equal space? So I am being vulnerable with you. You are being vulnerable with me. This is what I can expect from you. This is what you can expect from me. And what I've seen specifically with my newer hires, early career professionals, is this simple little strategy. Sounds really big, but it creates a increased, I'm not going to say belonging, but it creates an increased sense of purpose and or rootedness in the team from day one. And that's not necessarily something I learned from UDL, but rather something that just brings us to the same place. So you and I don't have to ask for what it is that we need. You're just proactively being met, and then you can ask for what you need. One of the other things that I do is similar to Sasha talking about the resources or the toolkit, I proactively do what we call resource guides and workshops internally and out in the world on different topics. It may not be my identity, but it's important for us to talk about. And I always go to the identity group and ask if they would like to do it or if they would like me to do it. Last year for Juneteenth, I asked my ERG if they wanted to do the education. They said, hell no, we're all taking the day off. And I said, great, I got you. And so I did the education with a lot of white folks, and it was exactly what it needed to be. And it was really lovely to meet folks where they were, but not have folks in the room who maybe didn't need to be hearing some of the impactful comments that would help learning. So really being proactive about how am I creating educational opportunities without someone needing it to be there. Constantly thinking about what needs to happen without someone saying, I need this thing right now. Okay, I'm done.
Oh, thank you all so much. That's great. Talk to us more, because you've shared about the employers. Talk to us more about the connection you see when employers do create this inclusive workspace. Talk about the employee satisfaction and productivity that you see coming out of these employers, and how can universal design make a company more successful?
I can jump into this one. So like I said, a lot of the work I do is around psychological safety and creating those types of environments. And when I say psychological safety, it is the ability to be able to speak up without fear of retribution or harm in the workplace. Now, that's not to say that anybody can say anything at any time. It is related to the work that is happening within the organization. So I want to clarify that, because people think they could act the fool. And so it's not that. However, when we focus on creating these inclusive workplaces, Dr. Victoria really touched on it, because it is asking the right questions at the right time and making sure that people have what they need when they need it, right? And so when I was coaching, when I still do some coaching of leaders, it would always blow my mind when I would ask them, okay, so have you asked the folks on your team what they need in order to be successful? And they're like, no. I'm like, let's start there, right? Like, that's just a basic conversation piece. And I had one particular leader come back to me, and he was just like, oh my gosh, I asked that question and I learned so much. And I'm like, that's great. I was like, now, what did you learn? And he was like, everyone needs something different. Bingo. Right. And so even starting there, I think that you start to create this environment of inclusion, because now people feel seen for what they need, and you can then support them in those ways. Right. I love the idea of having the worksheet of, how do we work together? Because then it creates also a relationship that is going to be unique for that person, and not, I'm going to treat everyone the same. Everyone gets fair. Like, I want to be fair. Right. I'm like, if you have children, like I told y'all, I have twin boys. They have totally different personalities. I cannot treat them the same. Right. Same age, same gender, all the other things, totally different personalities. And so we have to think about the workplace in that same way. And so when I think about universal design, and I think about how leaders need to show up differently, the first thing that they need to do is build those relationships. The second thing they need to do is get out of this old school thinking that we are just cogs in a machine. Like, we are humans with very different needs, and success looks different for everyone. And so how do you position yourself so that you can help set everyone up for success? Once we have that shift in the mindset, then you start to see things look very different in the workplace. And so in the time that I've been doing the psych safety work, I have noticed that, excuse me, leaders are showing up differently. They're not showing up as, I tell you what to do, right? We teach them coaching skills. How do you ask the right questions? You don't have to have all the answers, right? But if I ask you, okay, so we did this, what would you do next time that may have a different outcome that's closer to what you want? Now you're empowering that person to be a decision maker and to think about things in a different way. You're not punishing them. And that's a whole other conversation about accountability does not equal punishment. But you're creating this environment where it's a symbiotic relationship and you are nurturing and feeding into someone versus checking a box to make sure that you get all the tasks done. And I think in a universal design space, you kind of remove those barriers and you really look at that human-centered aspect. And I'm quiet now.
That was beautiful. The symbiotic relationship is so important because for me, thinking about people as people, rather than that spoke in the wheel, the cog in the wheel, especially with the upcoming generations, it is not about showing up to work 9 to 5. It's about flexibility. It's about how do I adapt work to my life, not my life to work. And I think that the more folks recognize that early on will make a company stand out and be way more successful than any other. And for me, that flexibility is a huge part of universal learning design. It's on employers to be flexible, similar to faculty. Yes, it's important to have rigidity, but you have to explain why. You can't just have rigidity there for rigidity's sake. And I explain that to my clients all the time. When you can give us, especially as neurodivergent people, we like context. A lot of people see context as an excuse. It's not, it's contextual. You're giving me the why, and I'll do it better if I know the why. So for employers thinking about success, it's going to be sharing the context, having flexible hours, really making sure that they understand that everyone's needs are different. I use this graphic in all of my workshops that's like, it's a plant and it says, inclusion is recognizing that we all need something to thrive, but giving us our own specific thing to thrive is what's going to make us thrive. Because you can't put me in one environment and somebody else in the same environment and expect the exact same thing from us. So to even build a little bit on Sasha's point, I heard the words getting curious. So before we make an assumption and we come down on somebody about something, successful workplaces are going to be getting curious about a behavior rather than penalizing that behavior, not jumping to a PIP, performance improvement plan, but rather getting curious. Why are you not meeting your due dates? Maybe the person's ADHD. Maybe the person has an undiagnosed screaming autistic child in their face and they don't want to talk to you about it. So really recognizing that every human is different, and we are in a post onset of COVID world. We are still very much in an active pandemic. People are still very much struggling with the diagnosis, having long COVID, dealing with other symptoms from anything and everything. And recognizing the principles of UDL will make all of our workplaces better if we can provide flexibility, representation, vulnerability, psychological safety, and increased presence of different types of people and different thought patterns that are not harmful. And getting curious about the people around us and not just leaning on our 10-second perception and putting them into that little bucket. I will stop.
All
Am I
right.
allowed to ask a question? Or are we holding those?
Sure. Well, I was going to say, I was just going to ask just 1 second, Jen.
Yeah, no worries. That's okay. That's why I
I was about to open it up for that. But I was going to say, is there anything else? My next question was going to be, what can we as professionals in the workplace, possibly future entrepreneurs for some students, what can we do to help advocate for universal design in our spaces? I think you've all mentioned so many really great things already, but is there any final thing that you would say is really important for us to consider? And then we will get to Q&A, I promise. But any final thoughts on how we can advocate for this in our spaces?
When it's appropriate, hire a universal design consultant. That would be the first step to make sure the environment is set up appropriately. And so the interior design team at that particular corporation needs to be people that are trained. The architectural team need to come from a space of knowing universal and accessible design. So any chance that a building is going to be retrofitted or they're moving to a new space, it's got to start from the beginning, from the design phase of having universal design consultants, interior designers, lighting designers, as well as the architectural design. So do it from the beginning.
Thank you.
I would
Someone
say,
else?
I'm not a fan of the word ally, and that's a whole other conversation, but be the person to represent the folks that are not at the table. Right. And I'll use the example. One of the reasons why I left that place that I used to work was we were doing a website around all the inclusion activities and programs that we were doing. And I asked the question, is it screen reader accessible? And the response was, well, I don't know why it would need to be. And I'm like, it's about inclusion. Like, it's a whole website about inclusion, and y'all are questioning why I'm asking this question, right? So that was my sign that I needed to go. But no one else was thinking about that. And so I think one of the small things that people can do is whose voice is not at the table, and how can you be that advocate? Or even if you don't feel comfortable saying, you know what, let's bring somebody else in that can share a different perspective, that can help us make sure that we're doing this with everyone in mind. Right. So I think that that's a small thing. If, folks aren't, or if organizations aren't quite ready to do a full out universal design, that's a way to kind of push back and challenge how people think, right? Because we're very good at tunnel vision. And so when you start to think outside that box, and challenging kind of the norms, then you start to really begin to open up or advocate for others and get those voices in.
And I'm just gonna, I love that we're like threading this needle. Be the disruptor, cause the good trouble. If something is making the hair on the back of your neck stand up, ask the question. I have always been labeled a disruptor. I am always a problem. I am always a challenge. However, I am the one asking the questions that are hard because people don't like the answers. So I'm noticing the pattern, and then I say something, and the response is usually, we messed up, we didn't think about it. And I'll give you a very good example. We redid a floor of one of our offices. Nobody thought to bring in anybody, including me, to have a wellness space or a pumping room. So we retroactively had to pay thousands of dollars to make sure that there was something that was compliant with the law in that state, but also so someone who was out on parental leave didn't have to come back and have that awkward conversation of, I'm pumping, I need a space. I did that work. It wasn't on them. That should be on me or anyone else. To be honest, we should have thought of it, at the beginning, but I wasn't in the room. They started it before I got here. Having someone like any of us, even on staff, looking to the ERGs, not exploiting, tokenizing, or asking them because of what you think their identities are, but including them in conversations, because chances are a minoritized person will be thinking about another minoritized person. So how can we create spaces, town halls, feedback, etc., for people to share what's going on for them, and then actually actioning on it? The last thing I'll say is never get feedback if you will not action on it. Don't do anything just for Jennifer. I'm with you. I got you. If you're just doing it to gather the data, well, be prepared for disengagement because people will not be happy. So recognizing sometimes change takes time. Prior to my arrival on my job, there was a lot of upset around a lack of accountability around, I call it like right below federal hate crime stuff. So right below, so we're talking microaggressions, subtle acts of exclusion, and I'm gonna say general assholery. We're all adults. And so I created an accountability form. So if people are falling into any of those three buckets, that's right below what HR can do, they're going to be held accountable. So how are we actually instituting these things and holding folks accountable is a huge part of it. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you so much. Jennifer, I'm going to get to you first for your question, then we'll go to Douglas in the chat.
Okay, thanks. Oh my gosh, this is so my jam. Every word you are all saying resonate with me so on so many levels for so many reasons. But what I really want to ask of all of you is what tactics or arguments, not even necessarily an argument, I'm not sure I'm using the right word, but do you find work best with your clients or within your workspaces to help them to understand the value and importance of this work to be able to make that change? Because a lot of times we run up on naysayers or people who are like, we don't need to do that, or that's not going to add value. So I'm curious about what you run up against when it comes to that and what your tactics and techniques are for bringing others along with you.
One tactic, it's a business imperative. There's a lot of people out there. 1 in 4 people have a disability in this country. So are you accommodating those people? Are you inviting them? Do you make them feel they belong, either in the travel and tourism, the hospitality, or in the retail? And so that's the first one. It's the business imperative. It's the idea of growing your membership, growing your workforce, growing your business in terms of the number of people that you serve. And then secondary, it is the law. And so do you want to have a lawsuit against you or a complaint where now you've got to go into mediation because you didn't do something that you should have done, and maybe even get a fine later? So it is a moral obligation, it is a legal obligation, but I think more importantly, it's a business imperative. That's my thought.
Yeah, the first thing that came to mind, and I know this is not about DEI, but everything right now is very circulating around, anti-DEI. And I'm like, DEI is not illegal, right? None of this that we're talking about is illegal. There are laws to protect. And so for organizations that are like, oh, I don't have to do blah, 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 there are still laws. There's still ADA, right? There's still EEO. And so making sure that people realize like, okay, it may change how the letters, it may change, but these laws are in place. So I think that's one piece of it. I tend to come from the angle of everyone wants to feel valued, seen, heard, and connected, right? Do you want to be a leader that empowers that? I have yet to come across someone that is like, no, right? Like everyone wants to be a good person and everyone wants to do the right thing. And so it's okay. So let's talk about some of the things that might be hindering that, where people cannot show up, right, fully, or they're not being set up for success. And so how can we partner in that? I have yet to have someone say, yeah, no, I'm not interested, because then that makes them look bad. So yeah.
I kind of am coming at this from a couple of perspectives, especially in the working world. Gen Z is going to take over. So you either get on board or you don't. And yes, it's a business imperative. Yes, it is moral obligation. And I work with, we have 5 different generations in the workforce. The majority of my workforce currently is millennial and up. We are trying to bring in the younger generation. My firm's been around for 100 years. If we'd like to be around for another 100 years, we need to shift, we need to grow, and accountability. So the thing that I think people, the naysayers, feel so emboldened to be naysayers and to not be on board is because they've never been held accountable. What does accountability actually look like? It's coaching, it's withholding bonuses, it's going on performance evaluations. So truly hitting people where it means something to them, AKA their wallets. And it's worked. I can say that I have held multiple people accountable in a loving and respectful way. And I say loving, not like in a weird way, but like in a caring as a respectful human being. We tried for a year to get somebody to properly use someone's pronouns, and they willfully denied it and would not do it. When it came up on this inclusion improvement plan and it impacted their bonus, you better believe they started changing their tune. So I'm really leaning on the fact that if organizations want to recruit and retain top talent, They have to get on board with whatever the thing might be. Inclusion is not about just one thing, right? It is a myriad of identities, and Gen Z is not going to let it slide. I laugh because like my students are coming in full force and they are not going to let anybody get away with anything. Okay, I'm done.
Oh, thank you all. I have one more question for everyone from Douglas in the chat so you can see it. Douglas is an architect who specializes in design for aging and universal design. How do we spread the word that universal design is more than physical environment, and that the physical environment that meets the ADA is not really addressing UD? We will wrap up with this question.
I can jump in quickly. Before we even started, I had a conversation with Dr. Rosemary about a friend of mine who's starting a business to do just this, right? It's aging in place. It's working with organizations and architects to think about this early in the process. And when you're creating like these 55 plus communities, things happen. People want to be able to stay where they are for a while and thinking about them more holistically. The other thing is one of my clients is the National Council of Architectural Registration Boards. I had to make sure I pulled it up in NCARB. And I actually brought up the conversation with them. And there were a few people that hadn't even thought about universal design. And I'm like, you all are in charge of the tasks that architects need to take, right? You can create impact here. So I am actually meeting with their board of directors next month and bringing up universal design as a part of psychological safety. And so that's just my small way of planting seeds so that these folks on these boards are like, wait a minute, we didn't think about this. How can we do more or be more intentional in this space? Because it is absolutely going to be necessary. And I think the one thing that was not mentioned on this call is the disability community is the one space that grows exponentially year over year because we all age, right? And so it may be something different, but it's something that impacts everyone at some point, be it permanent, be it temporary. And so to think about it from that perspective, I think people need to have that connection, that aha moment for it to really matter.
And I'll just quickly add, Douglas, I work in a civil engineering firm, so I work with engineers, architects, folks doing roadways, buildings, bridges, water. And so one of the things that we talk about internally is connecting our folks to our ADA compliance coordinators in every state, and also doing internal education on how to proactively talk about accessibility, UDL or UD, and inclusion without it necessarily impacting you. And we, in a lot of cases, have to start with even just curb cuts and where curb cuts came from. So we start with ableism as a system and then we move forward. And I'm connected pretty broadly in the Northeast region, trying to send that out to our larger partners. But there are folks like me internally at these firms who are trying to do just that. So helping folks think beyond simply the physical and also some of the other environmental and other ways. So I appreciate the question because it is something we're tackling, trying.
Dr. Rossetti, any final thoughts?
Well, when you look at universal design, it's about the environment, but it's also about communication, and it's also about products. So if I could put your attention to the design of products, for example, you're at a workplace and you've got a locker. Is that locker in position so you could reach it? And more importantly, what's the hardware like? Can you really adjust that locker to open and close it without having to pinch your fingers? And so somebody that has no ability to pinch their fingers and twist that. So the product has to be redesigned in some cases. Microwaves have to be redesigned. And then in communication, my goodness, we're looking at all of the voice to text and all of the artificial intelligence and having captions and having summaries of meetings. So that's all a part of the idea of universal design, not only the environment, but communication as well as the product design.
All right. Well, thank you so much to all of our panelists. This has been so insightful. Virtual applause. And with that, I will hand this back to Caroline to wrap us up.
Thank you so much, everyone. I'm so excited that we got to hear you all talk and get your insights about universal design. And thank everyone for coming. If you would like to reach out for more, you can definitely go on the UNCC Identity at Work page and click disabled for more events. We have 2 more events coming up later this month. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Have a great afternoon.